Sheikh Khalid Al-Rahman had everything: power, wealth, and 3 wives who upheld his perfect public image. But when he fell for Maria Santos, a young Filipina nurse, his secret desire ignited a chain of betrayal, obsession, and murder that would turn Dubai's golden sands into a graveyard of lies. Sheikh Khalid Al-Rahman was the kind of man whose name carried weight in every corner of Dubai. Known for his immense fortune and refined presence, he was a symbol of power and tradition. Born into a wealthy lineage, he had everything: 3 wives, lavish estates, luxury cars, and the unwavering respect of the city's elite. Yet beneath his carefully polished exterior, Khalid was a man haunted by restlessness. His life, though adorned with comfort, lacked the thrill he once felt in his youth. His marriages had become formal arrangements built on appearances rather than affection. He smiled at charity galas, shook hands at business meetings, and played the role of a devoted husband perfectly. But inside, he felt trapped in a golden cage of expectations and appearances. That was until the arrival of Maria Santos, a quiet, gentle nurse from the Philippines, whose presence would change everything he believed about control. Maria came to work at Khalid's residence when his elderly mother suffered a stroke. She was soft-spoken but confident, her kindness evident in every gesture. To Khalid, she was unlike any woman he had known, unassuming yet dignified, simple yet captivating. While his wives surrounded themselves with jewels and perfumes, Maria wore a plain uniform and a cross pendant that caught the light when she moved. He began to notice her more than he should have. At first it was innocent, a conversation about his mother's medication, a polite smile exchanged in the hallway, but soon it became something he could not resist. Late one evening, Khalid visited his mother's quarters and found Maria reading softly by her bedside. The tenderness in her voice, the patience in her tone, stirred something dormant inside him. It began as curiosity but evolved into desire, a dangerous craving he knew he should resist. Still, the temptation grew with every passing day. He began inventing reasons to see her, lingering in the hallways after dinner, asking unnecessary questions just to hear her voice. Maria, unaware at first, began to feel uneasy under his watchful gaze. Yet, when he spoke to her, his tone carried warmth, charm, and promises of kindness that made her heart soften. It wasn't long before the invisible line between them was crossed. Khalid began inviting her to secluded parts of the palace, ensuring his wives never found out. He told her she was special, that he felt alive when he was with her. Maria resisted at first, knowing the risks, but loneliness and affection clouded her judgment. She had left her homeland seeking a better future, not realizing she would be drawn into a world where love and danger could look the same. Their meetings grew frequent, their connection deeper. To Maria, it felt like fate, like she had finally found someone who saw her beyond her uniform. But for Khalid, the affair was an escape from his monotonous life, not a future he planned to sustain. Still, he couldn't let go. The secrecy of it all thrilled him. He arranged for Maria to live in a private apartment under his company's name, away from the palace. He showered her with gifts and affection, assuring her that someday he would make their relationship official. For 3 years, they lived in this illusion of Luva's secret world that only existed in the dark. Yet cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface. Maria started noticing the subtle changes, the shorter visits, the missed calls, the growing distance in his tone. She could feel him slipping away, but she refused to believe it. Her heart was too deeply entangled in the dream he had painted for her. She began keeping memories of their time together, photos, voice notes, even private videos, tiny fragments of proof that what they shared was real. To her, they were tokens of love. To him, they would one day become his worst nightmare. As the years passed, Maria's hope began to turn into quiet desperation. Khalid's promises grew empty. His affection dimmed. She was invisible again, hidden away, forgotten, except for the moments when his guilt brought him to her door. What she didn't know was that her love story was never meant to have a happy ending. It had begun in secrecy, and it would end in fire. The affair between Sheikh Khalid and Maria had become a secret rhythm of stolen moments and whispered lies. For nearly 3 years, they lived in a world that existed only between midnight and sunrise. Khalid had arranged everything perfectly. Maria's apartment was under another name. Her phone bills were paid in cash, and no one from his circle knew she existed. To outsiders, she was just another migrant worker blending into the background of the city's vast wealth. But for Maria, her life revolved around him entirely. Every call, every visit, every small gesture from Khalid was enough to sustain her belief that he truly loved her. She imagined a future with him, a life where she wouldn't have to hide. What she didn't know was that the future she dreamed of was slipping further away with every passing day. Khalid's visits began to grow less frequent. Business trips became his excuse, then family obligations, and finally, complete silence. Maria waited days, sometimes weeks, without hearing from him. When she called, he didn't answer. When she sent messages, he left them unread. The apartment that once felt like a private paradise began to feel like a prison. She sat by the window at night, watching the glittering skyline, wondering if he was with one of his wives, pretending nothing between them had ever happened. Her thoughts grew darker, tangled between love and anger. She had sacrificed her dignity, her job, and her peace for a man who seemed to have erased her from his life. One evening, in a moment of heartbreak, Maria opened her phone and began scrolling through the videos and photos she had taken over the years. They were intimate, personal, filled with promises that now felt like lies. In those recordings, Khalid's words were filled with love and devotion. Hearing them again made her both ache and rage. She realized that while he had the power to walk away, she had nothing left except the memories he had given her. Her sadness turned into resolve. If Khalid could so easily forget her, she would make sure he remembered. Her decision was impulsive but fueled by months of pain. She gathered all the files, videos, photos, voice messages and attached them to an email addressed to Khalid. The subject line was simple: "You said you loved me." She pressed send, believing it would make him see what he had done, maybe even make him come back to her. But she didn't know that his official email was linked to shared family access, monitored by his household staff and wives. Within minutes, the recordings were seen by all three women, each discovering the affair in raw, undeniable detail. The evidence was explicit, leaving no room for excuses or denial. By morning, Khalid's home had erupted into chaos. His wives confronted him, furious and humiliated. Servants whispered behind closed doors. His brothers and business partners began calling, demanding answers. The scandal threatened to stain not just his personal life but his reputation across the city's social circles. The very empire of respect and control he had built was beginning to crumble. For the first time, the powerful Sheikh Khalid Al-Rahman was cornered, trapped by the very woman he had once controlled so easily. Maria didn't know what her actions had set in motion. She believed Khalid would reach out to her, maybe apologize or even try to make things right. Instead, he went silent. Days later, she received a brief message from an unknown number, asking to meet in person and talk about what had happened. She thought it was him reaching out at last, ready to mend what was broken. But behind that message was something far darker. Khalid's fury had turned into desperation. He was a man who had everything to lose, and in his world, losing face was worse than death. As Maria waited for him to call again, she began packing her things, planning to leave Dubai for good. She was tired, heartbroken, and ready to move on. Yet deep inside, she hoped he would still show up just one last time to make her believe the love had been real. But that meeting, when it finally came, would not bring forgiveness or closure. It would be the beginning of her final night, the moment her love story turned into a nightmare written in ash and smoke. The night Maria received the message to meet Sheikh Khalid, she felt a flicker of hope she thought had long died. After weeks of silence and humiliation, she convinced herself that perhaps he wanted to fix things, to explain everything. The message had been simple and formal, nothing like his old affectionate tone. But Maria ignored the unease, twisting inside her. She spent hours preparing, choosing a white dress he once said made her look pure and graceful. Her heart raced as she looked at her reflection in the mirror, part fear, part anticipation. She told herself that love, no matter how broken, deserved one last chance. What she didn't realize was that Khalid's love had already curdled into something unrecognizably an obsession tainted by rage and fear. Khalid, on the other hand, was a man cornered by his own secrets. The scandal had torn through his household like wildfire. His wives, once bound by silence, turned against him. His business partners avoided him, and whispers had reached government ears. He saw his empire trembling, his name stained beyond repair. Every luxury he owned, every ounce of respect he had built, felt fragile under the weight of exposure. To him, Maria was no longer a woman he loved, but the cause of his downfall, the one person who could still destroy what little he had left. He couldn't think rationally anymore. His thoughts spun in dark loops of anger and panic. In his mind, there was only one way to end it. He instructed one of his most loyal drivers to prepare a convoy under the pretense of a late-night trip. They drove out of the city, heading toward a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi, a place he often used for private meetings. The building sat isolated amid the desert, surrounded by silence and miles of empty land. It was the kind of place where screams could disappear into the wind without a trace. Khalid arrived hours before Maria, pacing restlessly through the dimly lit rooms. Every sound, every flicker of light seemed to taunt him. His mind was a storm of humiliation and fury. He poured himself a drink, staring into the glass as if it held an answer. When he thought of Maria's face, all he could see was betrayal. Maria arrived close to midnight, unaware of the danger waiting for her. She stepped out of the car, clutching her phone, and looked around the deserted property. The air was dry and heavy, the sky clouded in darkness. Inside, Khalid waited, his expression unreadable. She approached with cautious optimism, thinking maybe he had forgiven her, maybe there was still a future, but something in his silence felt wrong. The man standing before her was not the Khalid she had known. The charm and warmth had vanished, replaced by a coldness that made her chest tighten. Fear began to crawl up her spine, but she ignored it, still trying to believe that love could fix what was broken. What happened next was quick and merciless. Neighbors later told police they saw faint flashes of light and heard what sounded like shouting, followed by a fire that lit the night sky. By the time the authorities arrived, the farmhouse was engulfed in flames. Khalid was gone, and Maria's body lay amid the debris, burned beyond recognition. Investigators found traces of accelerant, suggesting the fire had been deliberate. For days, her death was reported as an accident, a gas explosion at a private property, but rumors began to spread among those who knew her, painting a far darker picture. Khalid thought the flames would erase the evidence, that the desert would swallow the truth. But fate had a cruel way of unearthing secrets. Surveillance cameras, digital records, and fragments of charred belongings began to tell a story he couldn't silence. Maria's final moments became the spark that would ignite the downfall of the man who believed himself untouchable. What he tried to bury in the dark was about to come back to destroy him piece by piece. When the fire at the farmhouse was first reported, it seemed like just another tragic accident in the desert, a blaze caused by faulty wiring or a burst gas line. But the details didn't fit. The property was registered under one of Sheikh Khalid's private companies, a place that had been inactive for years. The structure was nearly empty, except for a single car parked outside and the remains of a woman found inside. The initial report was vague, but when investigators discovered that the body belonged to Maria Santos, a foreign worker with ties to the Al-Rahman household, whispers began to stir in the city's elite circles. Something about the story didn't add up. The medical examiner's findings deepened the mystery. Maria hadn't died from smoke inhalation, she had been unconscious before the fire started. The police quietly began digging into Maria's last known contacts. Her phone, though badly damaged, contained fragments of her messages, including one from an unknown number, asking her to meet and resolve things. That number, when traced, linked back to one of Khalid's close aides. The pieces were starting to connect, but the case was delicate. Khalid's position and influence meant that any accusation against him had to be handled with care. Still, a few determined officers sensed there was more to the story than what they were being told. They began gathering evidence quietly, pulling security camera footage, examining car tracking logs, and rechecking statements from staff who worked in Khalid's home. Meanwhile, Khalid maintained his calm facade, pretending to mourn Maria's death as if she were a distant acquaintance. He made a generous donation to her family, citing deep regret over the tragic accident, but behind the scenes, he was unraveling. The media had already caught wind of the scandal from anonymous leaked stories about a secret mistress, recorded affairs, and a mysterious fire that claimed her life. His wives, once bound by fear of shame, refused to protect him any longer. Their testimonies, though indirect, hinted at years of deceit and manipulation. Khalid's carefully built image of control was beginning to collapse, and he could feel the walls closing in. The turning point came when investigators recovered partial GPS data from Khalid's convoy vehicles. On the night of the fire, one of his cars had been recorded near the remote property, staying there for over 2 hours. That discovery changed everything. The evidence was subtle but powerful enough to reopen the case as a potential homicide. Forensics specialists went back to the ruins and found traces of gasoline residue and fragments of glass bottles used to ignite the blaze. It became clear that someone had tried to stage the fire to destroy evidence. Maria's remains also revealed defensive wounds, suggesting she had been attacked before losing consciousness. Every new finding stripped away Khalid's version of events. When police finally brought him in for questioning, he maintained his innocence with his usual composure, claiming he was being framed. But the cracks in his confidence showed. His voice trembled when investigators presented the timeline, the phone records, and the recovered messages from Maria's email. The very recordings Maria had made, the ones that caused the scandal, were now evidence of motive. Khalid had every reason to silence her, and now, even his wealth and power couldn't mask the truth that was surfacing. As the investigation deepened, more witnesses emerged. A driver admitted he had dropped Maria at the farmhouse that night under Khalid's orders. A servant confessed to seeing Khalid return home with burn marks on his wrist. Each testimony brought the truth closer to the surface, turning what had once seemed like an accident into a clear act of murder. The city buzzed with disbelief as one of its most powerful men became the focus of a criminal investigation. Behind the gold gates and lavish palaces, the illusion of power was cracking, and the name Sheikh Khalid Al-Rahman would never again be spoken with reverence. The story of Maria's death had become a storm no amount of influence could silence, and the truth that burned her life away was finally beginning to light the path toward justice. The arrest of Sheikh Khalid Al-Rahman sent shockwaves through Dubai's elite circles. For years, his name had been untouchable, a symbol of wealth, generosity, and prestige. Now it was splashed across every headline, tied to words like murder, betrayal, and scandal. The authorities moved cautiously at first, aware of his connections and influence, but the evidence against him was impossible to ignore. Forensic reports, surveillance footage, and testimonies had built a case that even his lawyers struggled to dismantle. In the days following his arrest, Khalid sat in his private holding cell, dressed in plain prison garments instead of his immaculate robes. The arrogance that once defined him began to fade, replaced by quiet desperation. He still clung to the belief that his money could save him, that somehow, the world he had bought and shaped would bend once more to his will. But this time, the truth was too heavy to bury. The trial became a spectacle that gripped the entire nation. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, and journalists from across the world reported every twist. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Khalid's wives attended the hearings, their faces hidden behind black veils, refusing to look at the man who had destroyed their lives. Prosecutors presented the digital evidence first, the GPS trail leading to the farmhouse, the accelerant residue found on his clothes, and the reconstructed messages between him and Maria. Each piece painted a clearer picture of what had happened that night. Khalid's defense tried to argue that the fire had been accidental, that someone else might have framed him, but the weight of the findings was unrelenting. The most chilling moment came when the court played one of Maria's recordings. Her voice filled the courtroom, gentle, trusting, unaware of the danger that awaited her. It was a simple message she had left for him during their affair, but in that moment, it became a haunting echo of the love that had been betrayed. Some in the courtroom wept quietly. Others stared at Khalid with disbelief. The once powerful sheikh sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the ground. For the first time, his silence looked like guilt, not pride. As the trial progressed, witnesses came forward one by one. The driver who dropped Maria at the farmhouse described how she seemed hopeful, carrying her purse and phone, saying she was going to meet Khalid to make peace. A household servant admitted seeing Khalid return late that night, smelling of smoke, his hands trembling as he washed them. An investigator testified about finding Maria's burned belongings and the faint traces of her final email to a friend that read, "He said he wants to end this peacefully." The irony of those words cut through the courtroom like a blade. In the end, the verdict was inevitable. The jury found Sheikh Khalid Al-Rahman guilty of premeditated murder and destruction of evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. When the sentence was read, he remained still, showing no emotion. But his eyes betrayed something deeper, recognition that his empire, built on lies and fear, had finally crumbled. His wives divorced him, his business partners severed ties, and his name was stripped from every charitable foundation he once funded. The palace that once hosted glittering banquets became a silent monument to his downfall. Maria Santos's story did not fade with the verdict. Her family in the Philippines received international support, and her name became a symbol of courage in the face of power. Journalists and activists spoke of her as a reminder of the many women silenced by fear, love, or control. Her recordings, the same ones that had led to her death, became evidence that no truth can stay hidden forever. In the years that followed, the desert farmhouse was abandoned, its walls scorched and crumbling. Some said the place felt cursed, a silent witness to love turned lethal. But those who visited said the wind there carried an eerie calm, as if Maria's spirit had found peace at last. Sheikh Khalid, once the master of everything he touched, spent his days in isolation, haunted by memories that no amount of wealth could erase. His name, once spoken with admiration, became a warning whispered through the city, a reminder that power without conscience always leads to ruin. Maria had been silenced by fire, but her story burned brighter than any flame he could ever control.